Well, thank you very much. That almost went longer than I think I'm going to talk for. So basically, Georgie and I, we had a bit of interaction between Bill, Georgie and I, and I've decided that they've all dazzled you with their brilliance, and I'm just going to give a few war stories based on my experience of looking after doctors over a period of time. It would seem to me, I find it interesting, we're talking about reducing risk, and that seems to be what what defensive medicine is, and yet you can't completely reduce risk for your patients, and I don't see how, I think it's unrealistic for doctors to also attempt to completely avoid or reduce risk for themselves. It's just part of life. So, there seem to me, apocryphally, that there are two different types of defensive medicine. You've got your positive defensive medicine, which is your assurance behaviour. That is going the extra mile, ordering the additional tests. Often that can be patient-driven and not really discussing the matter with the patient. Is this test necessary? I had a health assessment as part of being a partner. We are offered, the partnership of my firm, we each offered a health assessment, where they a group that do corporate health assessments and make a lot of money out of it, I think, as well. And so I rocked along last week to find out that I probably should lose some weight and I need to eat a bit better and what have you, but my liver function tests were fine, I'm very happy to say. And I have a history of heart disease. My mother had coronary bypass surgery at the age of 50. Now I've overtaken that age, and I don't have all of her comorbidities. But they were pushing very hard for me to have, and I've forgotten what you call it because I try not to be a doctor, even though I look after them. It's a type of test that requires me to be subjected to radiography that can measure levels of calcium in my arteries, whatever that is. Now they've been pushing for me to have this test for a while. I've been balking at that because I've been discussing it with my GP. They also offer to provide that, by the way. And my GP says, look, you can do it if you want to, but then what do you do? So I trust my GP. I really like him. He and I discuss things quite regularly, and I'm not inclined to do it. But just because a test is available doesn't mean you should be doing it. And a bit of critical analysis is not such a good idea. It is a good idea. Apologies. Georgie commented before about the medico-legal risks of the positive defensive medicine. As for exposing people to unnecessary radiography, I won't comment on that because I'm sure there'll be a case on it in due course. But the most obvious medico-legal risk from my point of view is an audit by Medicare. There is a real friction there. And I've been dealing with that for a while now when doctors I act for are criticised for not ordering the machine that goes ping. They turn around and say, yeah, but Medicare aren't going to like it if I keep ordering that. So it is part of this balancing act. Okay, the negative defensive medicine is the avoidance behaviour. And that's the usual histrionic, I'm never going to do medicine, I'm going to give up medicine, I'm going to go and do law. Which is music to my ears every time I hear it. But I understand. Now, all of my evidence is apocryphal. I've done no empirical research at all, so this is just, my meanderings, literally, over the last 20-odd years. But I understand that people do think twice about going into ONG, or you certainly hear the horror stories about it, neurosurgery, that sort of thing. The worst part of that, I think, is avoiding high-risk patients. I think that's a real shame. I regularly look after doctors who might be looking down the barrel of a disciplinary matter because they've had a few adverse events. That's because they've got the hard patients. And they're left to do it because A, they've got the expertise, B, they're willing to do the right thing. So that brings me to the next issue, which everybody else has touched on, and Georgie and I were saying this morning after this morning's session that basically our work here is done, we don't need to talk this afternoon. But basically, let's go back because we're looking at claims, we're not looking at disciplinary matters, and that's an entirely new, different thing altogether. But basically, the tort of negligence is a failure to provide a reasonable standard of care. It's not gold standard. It's not perfection. The law does not require perfection. I don't know where that comes from. I really don't. I suspect it's, some journalists having a field day. And on that point, I picked up from Australian Doctor, the article, one of which, the headlines, it was on Georgie's first slide, and the headline says, X-ray may have saved teen, court told. Now, when you actually read it, which takes a bit of time, rather than just looking at the headline, you'll see that it's a very unusual situation. It's very sad. A young teenage Aboriginal girl had myocarditis. She was 18 years old and she developed it shortly before she died. And there was an inquest, for obvious reasons, into her death. So we go through the report, blah, 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 right down to the bottom until we finally find out that, in fact, the coroner did not make any formal finding over shortcomings of individual practitioners who took part in Ivy's care. So even though an expert did say, yes, an X-ray could have found it, other experts also said, and I quote, "It is always possible with hindsight to be wise, but that he was of the opinion that the outcome was inevitable and treatment would not have changed the final outcome and the death." So I don't know, I mean, that's a very sad case, but I don't know how that headline helps anybody. And it certainly doesn't reduce any anxiety that anybody might be having. Now, when it comes to the tort of negligence, you've got those elements there. So duty is determined by the courts. They will decide, because that's a legal question more often than not, who owes a duty to whom. Doctors clearly owe a duty to their patients. Healthcare practitioners will owe a duty to their patients. The standard is reasonable care, and the courts will take guidance from experts, i.e., in order to successfully make a claim against your treating practitioner, you must have another expert of the same, or a peer in the same specialty who is willing to criticise that treating practitioner. And I have regularly been amazed at the level of vitriol and criticism that you will see from time to time in expert reports. The most recent example that sprang to mind, I was recently involved in a matter. I was acting for a GP based in a hospital setting who was one of a couple of GPs sued by on behalf of a 13-year-old boy. His mother was his litigation guardian. He was in a provincial area of regional area, not even provincial, it was out west. There was a late diagnosis of appendicitis. He had to be flown into Brisbane, and he had a very, very stormy course, but he did make a fairly good recovery. In fact, we found out that he'd been playing for the local rugby league team, so he didn't do too badly. Anyway, a claim was made, and the expert opinion relied upon by the plaintiff to support the claim came from an emergency physician based in a metropolitan hospital. And he criticised the GPs, both in the local area, the private GP, the hospital GP, and various others, for not ordering a CT scan to exclude appendicitis. A CT scan machine was not available in this area. He would have had to have driven 200 miles to go to a provincial area to undergo a CT scan and be subject to radiography. As a result of that. Now, that claim ended up going nowhere. It was eventually discontinued. But we did go through the process, and there were at least 6 legal teams involved, as best I can recall. There were 5 defendants. They were all separately represented. Now, that would have been at quite a bit of cost. Had that report not been provided, that wouldn't have gone anywhere. So that's just an example of that. I did hear somebody mention this morning about the fear of litigation and being crucified, and I found that very interesting. And I'll just give you an example. You're not necessarily crucified if you're subject of a writ. The classic example there is Dr. Stephen Katharine, who has heard of Melchior and Katharine. Went all the way to the High Court. Dr. Stephen Katharine lovely, lovely man, very good obstetrician, highly regarded. He performed a Filshie clip procedure on Mrs. Melchior a number of years ago, back in either late 1990s or very early 2000s. She gave a history of having had her right ovary and fallopian tube removed as a young girl. And she underwent a single tubal Filshie clip procedure for her left fallopian tube. The area where her right ovary and fallopian tube was covered with adhesions. Dr. Katharine did it laparoscopically. He looked down the scope. The area that would have had, the area where the right fallopian tube and ovary would have been was covered with adhesions. He wasn't going to go poking around to see if he could find them and make sure. That looked okay, and he wasn't criticised for that. He was found, and as luck would have it, guess what? She's still got a right ovary, and egg migrates and transmigrates up to, and basically she becomes pregnant. And she is pregnant with a boy. They had only ever had girls, but she did become pregnant into her 40s, and it was a bit of a shock. So she sued Dr. Katharine as well as a few others, and his name was on the pleading. And they got up. The negligence, if memory serves at trial, was that he should have warned of the possibility of a failure of the procedure because the other ovary may have still been in existence. Something along those lines. It was a bit obscure. The matter ended up going to the High Court because she was awarded damages for the costs of raising a healthy child, and that was new law. So the matter went all the way up to the High Court to decide whether or not that was law, and the High Court said, yes, you can recover damages for the costs of raising a healthy child as a result of a failed sterilisation procedure. And subsequently to that decision was handed down in July 2003. The following year, certainly in Queensland, our Civil Liability Act was amended to basically expunge that head of damage. So you don't have any claims anymore in Queensland. But at the end of the day, Dr. Katharine's practice did not suffer. There was a lot of publicity over that, and I have heard him say in a public forum when talking to young doctors about to go into private practice about the vagaries of litigation. And he said, look, the morning the High Court decision was handed down, my waiting room was full. And what's more, there are a couple of lawyers in there. So it doesn't have to be the end of the world. And I from my own, soapbox issue, is that I would like to see better education of doctors to explain the forensic process to them so that they don't find it quite so threatening. No one likes the idea of making a mistake, and I think that's part of the issue. Those of us who are, a lot of doctors and most lawyers I know have perfectionistic natures. They are obsessive personalities. They like to be right. And the idea of making a mistake is mortifying. But I think we have to learn that sometimes that's going to happen and that we need to have our support mechanisms in place. Have your MDO. It didn't used to be compulsory. It is now. Have your insurer. Look after your relationships, and certainly look after your relationships with your patient, which is my next point. I've come to the conclusion that if you want to avoid a claim, you must establish and maintain good relationships with your patients. If your patients like you, they are less likely to make a claim. Now, it depends on what we're talking about. Obviously, if there's a catastrophic injury and they need money to support themselves, well, that's another issue. But the example I've got there is from a number of years ago where I looked after a locum who was who stepped into a GP's practice while he went on holidays. An extremely difficult patient turned up. There was a contretemps between them. I think they had very similar personalities. And there was an issue about whether or not he had told the patient to come back and get a lesion on his head checked, which ended up being ignored, and by the time it was diagnosed, there was a metastatic SCC. Now, what had happened there was the locum had kept good notes about what he told this chap, so we were able to defend it. But in the process, we discovered that the GP, whom the very difficult patient loved, had come back from holidays and had not checked over his notes. And he had not looked back and said, oh, hang on, what's this all about? We better have a look at that. So the patient only sued the locum. He did not sue the GP. And I remember at the time being extremely grateful, and I certainly wasn't going to ask him because I couldn't highlight it the fact to him. But we were able to defend the locum. Had he sued the GP, we probably would have had to have settled it. Similarly, probably with Dr. Katanak. His patients really liked him and they stuck through thick and thin when things happened. Okay, and I will just finish up on commenting on the difference between disciplinary matters and civil claims. Frankly, nowadays, doctors are more at risk of facing a disciplinary complaint than they are a civil claim. I was recently doing some education for some doctors out west, and they all knew about the civil stuff and that worried them. But after a while, we were talking about various other things, and they weren't aware of the fact that they couldn't self-prescribe, that was a no-no. And one of them said, "You're joking." I said, "No, I'm not." So we're obviously seeing a bit of a change in how things are done. Just because you've been doing it one way for 20 years doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way. But on that note, I will finish up. Thank you.